The year is 1431. In the market square of Strasbourg, a master blacksmith named Heinrich of Freiburg awaits his execution. His crime was refusing to forge weapons for a war he believed to be unjust. His punishment would be death by sawing, a method so horrifying that even medieval chroniclers, accustomed to public violence, described it with shock and revulsion. This is the story of one of history's most extreme judicial punishments, a practice that reveals the absolute power of medieval authority and the terrible price paid by those who defied it. The punishment known as death by sawing existed in various forms across ancient and medieval civilizations. Roman sources mention it. Biblical texts reference similar executions, but it reached its most systematic application in medieval Europe between the 12th and 17th centuries. Unlike the sanitized versions of medieval justice we see in popular media, this was not a quick beheading or dramatic hanging. This was a punishment designed specifically to maximize suffering and create an unforgettable spectacle of state power. Historical execution manuals from the period describe the procedure with clinical precision. These weren't secret torture methods, they were official legal protocols, documented in court records and guild regulations for executioners. The condemned would be suspended upside down, secured at the ankles to a wooden scaffold. A tomb and timber saw, the same type used for cutting oak beams, would be employed. The executioner would begin at the groin and work downward toward the head. The inverted position was deliberate and based on observed physiological effects. When suspended upside down, blood rushes to the brain, maintaining consciousness far longer than would otherwise be possible during severe trauma. Medieval executioners understood this through generations of experience. Even without modern medical knowledge, court records suggest that victims could remain conscious until the saw reached the abdomen or even higher. This wasn't accidental. The prolonged awareness was the entire purpose of the punishment. Why would any legal system authorize such extreme cruelty? To understand this, we need to understand medieval concepts of justice, which were fundamentally different from modern principles. Medieval European law wasn't primarily concerned with rehabilitation or even deterrence in the way we understand it today. The central purpose was retribution and the public demonstration of sovereign power. The body of the criminal legally belonged to the authority that judged them. The suffering inflicted on that body served multiple functions: punishment for the individual, warning to the community, and most importantly, a visible display of the state's absolute power over its subjects. The severity of punishment was calibrated to the severity of the crime. For ordinary offenses like theft, hanging was sufficient. For serious crimes like murder, additional elements might be added: breaking on the wheel, burning, or partial disembowelment before death. For the most extreme offenses, treason, regicide, heresy, or fundamental challenges to social order, extraordinary punishments were required. Death by sawing fell into this category, reserved for crimes that authorities deemed attacks on the very foundation of society. The legal justification had strong theological components. Medieval Christian doctrine taught that earthly suffering could reduce punishment in the afterlife. A condemned person who endured great pain before death might thereby satisfy some portion of their debt to divine justice. In this framework, the executioner wasn't merely an agent of state violence but a servant of God's justice, helping the condemned make payment for their sins. This theology made extreme punishments seem almost merciful, finite worldly suffering that might reduce infinite damnation. Heinrich of Freiburg's case illustrates how this system functioned in practice. He was a respected craftsman, a guild member in good standing, a husband and father who paid his taxes and contributed to his community. His opposition to forging weapons came from sincere religious conviction, based on Christian just war doctrine. In 1431, the Margrave of Baden demanded that Strasbourg's blacksmith guild produce hundreds of weapons for his military campaign. Most smiths complied, understanding the danger of refusal. Heinrich did not. He argued that the planned war was unjust aggression, and that crafting weapons for such a cause would make him complicit in sin. He cited scripture and theological authorities. He explained his position to guildmasters, city magistrates, and the Margrave's commissioners. His refusal was reported as sedition and contempt of lawful authority. The trial lasted 3 days. Several clergy testified that his interpretation of just war doctrine was defensible. Character witnesses confirmed his loyalty and reputation. None of it mattered. The magistrate, under pressure from city authorities who feared the Margrave's displeasure, delivered the predetermined verdict: guilty. The punishment, death by sawing, to be carried out in 17 days on the feast of St. Bartholomew. The choice of date was symbolic. St. Bartholomew had been martyred by flaying. The connection would not be lost on the medieval audience. Heinrich was taken to the dungeon beneath the courthouse to await his execution. The 17 days between sentencing and execution served multiple purposes in the medieval justice system. This period allowed for spiritual preparation, gave the condemned time to settle worldly affairs, and built anticipation for the public spectacle to come. Heinrich's cell was one of several reserved for condemned prisoners. These cells were marginally better than those for ordinary criminals, larger, with wooden sleeping platforms and more frequent waste removal. This wasn't compassion, it was practical. Prisoners needed to arrive at their executions in physical condition to endure them. The first visitor was a priest assigned to prepare Heinrich's soul. This spiritual preparation was considered essential. The condemned were expected to confess their sins, accept their punishment, forgive their judges, and express hope for salvation, a ritual script that had to be followed regardless of personal feelings. Those who refused this script, who died cursing authorities or denying guilt, sometimes faced additional punishments even after death. Their bodies might be denied burial or left exposed as continued warning. On August 24, 1431, Heinrich was brought to the market square. Contemporary records indicate that such executions drew enormous crowds, hundreds or thousands of spectators, including city officials, clergy, guild members, and ordinary citizens. The scaffold had been constructed according to standard specifications. Master Conrad, the city's executioner, was a professional with decades of experience. Like other executioners of the period, he viewed his work as a skilled craft requiring precision and technical knowledge. The execution followed the documented procedure. Heinrich was positioned inverted on the scaffold, his legs secured separately to maintain the required position. The tomb on timber saw was freshly sharpened. Before the execution began, Heinrich was given opportunity for final words. According to records, he followed the expected script, forgiving his condemners and commending his soul to God's mercy. These ritual phrases were standard, revealing nothing of his actual emotional state but fulfilling the social expectations of a proper death. What followed took approximately 2 hours, according to surviving accounts. The medical realities of such an execution are as terrible as one would expect. Modern trauma specialists who have analyzed historical descriptions confirm that the physiological details recorded by witnesses are accurate. The inverted position does maintain consciousness during severe trauma by keeping blood flowing to the brain. The progression of cutting from the groin upward would indeed allow prolonged awareness until catastrophic blood loss finally occurred. Historical records of death by sawing exist from various parts of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire, France, Spain, and Italian states all documented cases. The punishment appears in legal codes, execution manuals, and eyewitness accounts from the 12th through 17th centuries. The last well-documented cases occur in the early 1600s, as European legal systems began gradually moving away from spectacular public executions toward less visible forms of punishment. The transition wasn't about humanitarian concerns, it was about changing concepts of state power and social control. Modern historians who study these punishments aren't engaging in sensationalism. Understanding how legal systems authorized extreme cruelty helps us comprehend how authority operates, how societies normalize violence, and how human beings are capable of inflicting and witnessing terrible suffering when that suffering is institutionalized and given official sanction. The story of Heinrich of Freiburg raises questions that remain relevant. What happens when individual conscience conflicts with state authority? How do legal systems justify extreme punishment? What does public spectacle of suffering reveal about a society's values? Medieval Europe's justice system was built on principles we now reject: that punishment should be physically spectacular, that suffering should be maximized, that the body of the condemned belongs to the state. But understanding this history requires confronting an uncomfortable truth. These weren't aberrations or excesses by rogue individuals. This was the system, functioning as designed. The men who sentenced Heinrich, who built the scaffold, who performed the execution, and who gathered to watch weren't monsters. They were ordinary people operating within a legal and theological framework that made such cruelty seem not only acceptable but necessary and just. The distance between their world and ours isn't as great as we might prefer to believe. Every legal system rests on the power to punish. Every authority claims the right to use force against those who defy it. The forms change. We no longer saw people in half in public squares, but the fundamental dynamic of state power over individual bodies remains. Heinrich of Freiburg died for asserting that his conscience superseded lawful authority. His punishment was designed to ensure no one else would make the same claim. Whether that punishment achieved its purpose, or whether it simply demonstrated the terrible costs of absolute power, remains a question for each of us to consider. This is history not as entertainment, but as evidence of what human civilizations are capable of when cruelty becomes law. Remember it not with fascination but with understanding and with determination that we never return to such darkness.